Today we are talking about a racing game that released in 2006 for the PlayStation 2, which, kind of already makes this game interesting before you even boot it up, because 2006 is quite late for a PS2 game. Not like middle of the generation late, but the PS3 is kind of already here late. By this point, developers had spent years figuring out the PS2's quirks, squeezing every ounce of performance out of it, and in the year of 2006, on multiple platforms we got games like Test Drive Unlimited, Need for Speed Carbon, Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast, and the Cars tie-in video game, all of which were pretty good looking games. And as well as being good looking, they were good games. And then we have Urban Extreme, a game that looks at all of those games and says, what if we made a racing game with 4 tracks, and then made them look exactly the same? Welcome to the Worst Racing Games, the internet series where you guys suggest different racing games that you think are terrible, then I play them, review them, and rank them. And yes, the Worst Racing Game series is back with its first episode in 2026, with a fittingly quite bad game called Urban Extreme, which if I had to describe it in 2 words, I would probably say it's extremely urban. So before we get into the gameplay of this, game, if we can call it that, let's go into some history about the game first. So this game was developed by Data Design Interactive, a developer notorious with awful quality games. Somehow last year I only covered one of their games, and that was the absolutely awful Action Girls Racing. And you'll see a lot of the flavour of Action Girls Racing, which released a year prior, in Urban Extreme. The way the AI behaves, the UI layout, everything. It's almost like a copy-paste, but looks slightly less ugly. Anyway, it was published by Metro 3D and released in June of 2006 exclusively on the PlayStation 2. Urban Extreme came out at a time when racing games were either going open world, getting extremely cinematic, or leaning heavily into realism, or doing all of the above. Test Drive Unlimited also released in 2006, which gave you Hawaii to drive around. Meanwhile, Urban Extreme gives you 4 generic city tracks, all built around the same extremely urban concept. Sorry, I'm going to keep saying extremely urban, because the pun is very intentional. The game is called Urban Extreme, and it commits to that word with such intensity that it forgets that cities usually have variety, and sometimes green spaces. The maps in Urban Extreme are just skyscrapers, flat buildings, concrete overpasses, construction sites. That's it. It's basically the whole aesthetic. If you shuffled footage of all 4 tracks together and told me it was one very long circuit, I would 100% believe you without question. And I would be very surprised if any of you are able to distinguish the tracks apart from the footage being shown. So yeah, let's talk about those tracks, because that's one of the biggest issues with this game. There are only 4 of them, they're not 4 different cities, not 4 different regions, just 4 tracks set within the same indescript city that doesn't actually have a name. I mean, I guess we can just call the city Urban Extreme Land or something. Anyway, they all share the same visual identity to the point where distinguishing them becomes genuinely difficult. They're all grey, flat, lifeless, and surrounded by copy-paste urban scenery. There's no sense of place, no landmarks that stick in your mind, and no, oh yeah, this is the good track. It's just constantly, this is the bad place. It feels less like racing through a city and more like racing through a construction company's very generic screensaver. The layouts themselves aren't even offensively bad, they're just there. Long straights, sharp corners, some awkward elevation changes that don't feel intentional, and enough obstacles on the later tracks, so like the 3rd and 4th ones, to ensure you'll crash quite often. Which leads nicely into the handling. Urban Extreme's handling model is impressive in the sense that it covers a wide range of terrible. The handling varies from, oh, this is unpleasant, to this car should not legally exist. Most of the vehicles feel either wildly oversensitive or completely unresponsive, with almost no middle ground. But hey, at least that's different from Action Girls Racing, because all they drove was the same smart car. Steering inputs often feel delayed, then overcorrected, which is a fantastic combination when you're racing inches away from concrete walls, signs, and parked vehicles. And because the tracks can be quite narrow and fairly obstacle heavy, any mistake immediately turns into a violent crash. Except, in my experience, for one single car. That's right guys, that's how stretched for content this game is. I'm having to do a segment on one single car in the game. The 4x4 off-road vehicle that you start with is, without any exaggeration here, the only car in the game that feels remotely usable. It actually grips the road, it doesn't randomly fishtail, or at least it doesn't do it very often, and it doesn't explode the moment you look at a barrier funny. And this is why the majority of my gameplay footage that you are seeing is in this particular car. Not because I love it, but because it's the only car that allowed me to actually play the full game to make the review. Every other vehicle feels like it's fighting you at all times. I'll put some footage up for you to see how many times I crash the other cars.
When did you learn to drive?
Some of them oversteer into oblivion, understeer straight into walls, or bounce violently off of minor bumps like they've hit a landmine, which makes progression incredibly frustrating because the car selection is very limited and somewhat questionable. Urban Extreme has a very limited selection of cars, and what's here isn't exactly exciting. You've got a handful of street cars like a taxi, a sedan, later on a hot rod for some reason. There's a beach buggy, a couple of off-road vehicles like a rally car, and the aforementioned 4x4, and then that's kind of it. And I need to point this out because it genuinely made me laugh. The beach buggy is literally just called Beach Bug. Not buggy, just bug. Which feels less like a vehicle name and more like a placeholder someone forgot to perhaps change. Visually though, the cars are okay. They're not offensively ugly, but they're definitely not impressive for 2006. The models, to me at least, have this weirdly nostalgic early 2000s look to them, like something you'd see in a budget PC racer from like 5 years beforehand. They are serviceable, but nothing about them stands out, which is a problem when unlocking cars is basically the main form of progression. Oh, and whilst I'm quickly talking about the cars, the hot rod for some reason has a really comedic horn, and the AI whenever it uses it feels the need to just blast it constantly. It's so annoying. So just how many game modes does Urban Extreme treat you to? Well, Urban Extreme offers exactly 2 game modes, a single race and a time trial. That's it. No championships, no career ladder, no events with modifiers or variety, and time trial is treated as practice, which makes sense, but it also highlights how bare bones the whole experience is. You use time trial to learn the track, all 4 of them, and then single races where you earn the money. And that's the entire loop, guys, I'm not even joking. There is literally nothing to do in this game except 4 single races and 4 single time trials, with a possibility of like 8 different cars. Ridiculous. Now on paper, the progression in Urban Extreme sounds absolutely miserable. Here's how it works. Winning a race earns you $55, coming second earns you $45, and third $35, and then you come any lower than that, then tough luck buddy, no money for you. Unlocking all the cars requires $1,650, but crashing badly enough causes your car to explode, and every explosion costs you $10, which doesn't sound like much until you realise how often you explode. With the game's physics and handling, crashing isn't just common, it's pretty much inevitable. Tight corners, awkward hitboxes, unpredictable steering, it all adds up, so you're constantly losing money while trying to earn it, hence why I stuck with the 4x4. Now, here's the weird part. Despite how bad this sounds, unlocking everything only took me like 2 hours, because once you reach the required amount of money for a car, you don't actually have to spend the money or lose the money to get the car, it just unlocks. So it's basically just like an XP bar, but disguised as dollars. Which is a blessing really, because I would have hated to have got to the $1,000 mark, unlock the next car, lose all the money, then have to grind back up to $1,650. So that's good at least. So 2 hours isn't long, but when you're playing this game it does feel long, because you're doing the same races on the same tracks, with the same visual scenery, and for the sake of actually earning the money, in the same car, over and over again. There's no sense of momentum, no escalation, no new environments to look forward to. It's not a long grind, it's just an insanely, boringly repetitive one. Now, I touched on the visuals for the car models, but let's talk about the rest of it. So visually, Urban Extreme is, well, to put it nicely, quite dull. The environments are flat, they're grey, and respectfully they are very lifeless. There's very little environmental detail, and almost nothing happening in the background to make the city feel alive. There's no crowds, no dynamic elements, no planes flying over, there's like no atmosphere. It just feels like racing through an abandoned industrial zone at like all times. And while the PS2 wasn't exactly a powerhouse, this is 2006 and games were doing far more impressive things visually by this point. As I mentioned, the cars themselves are probably the best looking part of the game, and even then, okay is about as generous as I could possibly be. There is, however, one visual element that clearly received attention. I honestly wouldn't be surprised that a significant portion of Urban Extreme's budget went into the 3D rendered PS2 controller in the controls menu. And I mean that sarcastically, but also kinda not at the same time, because the controller model actually looks kinda good, rendered and rotating it in 3D, showing you which buttons do what. Like, that's a pretty cool touch, and I think that's probably the nicest thing I can possibly say about this game, is that it shows you the controls on a 3D rendered PS2 controller. Congratulations to Data Design Interactive, you've finally done something right in my eyes, you rendered a controller. Congrats. Oh, and the sound design doesn't really leave much of an impression either. The engine noises are generic, the crashes are loud and abrupt, music exists, but you won't really remember it. Nothing's offensively bad in terms of the sound, it's just incredibly generic and forgettable. Which honestly sums up most of Urban Extreme as a whole. So how did the game fare in its critical response? Well, I simply couldn't tell you. There is like not a single review out there that I could possibly find, except for one from a PlayStation magazine that says it's in there, but the actual review appears to have been lost to time because no one's logged it online. But if I had to guess, it probably didn't review very well, if it did at all. Interestingly enough, Urban Extreme actually did go on to get a sequel called Urban Extreme Street Rage on the Nintendo Wii, which I think is just absolutely criminal. I haven't looked into it at all, but I'm going to assume it was probably developed by Data Design Interactive as well, and was just another budget pile of garbage. Anyway, so now the time has come to rank Urban Extreme on our worst racing games tier list. Oh boy, the first ranking of 2026, how very exciting. Could you maybe guess where I'm going to put this one? So, Action Girls Racing, which was developed a year before by the same company, ended up in Pure Evil. And Urban Extreme will be joining its sister of Action Racing, because it is not good, guys, it's really not. There's nothing of value here, there's no content, the physics are whack, the AI is whack, the visuals are kinda whack, there's just nothing redeemable about the game, except a 3D rendered PS2 controller, but I'm not gonna let that affect the ranking of a racing game, So to summarise, like I said at the beginning, Urban Extreme is extremely urban, and I have nothing else to say about it. It's not memorable, it's not fun, it's just kind of there. And so that takes us to the end of our look at Urban Extreme for the PlayStation 2, and with it this week's episode of Worst Racing Games. So let me know in the comments down below what you think of this game. Have you played it? Are you now going to play it having seen this video? I sincerely hope not. And would you rank it any differently? And as always, if you have a suggestion for the Worst Racing Games wheel, pop that down below as well. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is, thanks, Happy New Year, and bye-bye.